The sun was just beginning to rise over the dusty horizon when Ethan tightened the straps of his worn leather boots and slung his rifle across his shoulder. The wind was calm, carrying the faint scent of dry sagebrush and earth warmed by the early light. He had risen earlier than usual, not because he loved the cold mornings, but because his family's pantry had grown thin. The ranch didn't produce much in the winter, and he needed game to keep food on the table. The thought of his wife's gentle smile and his children's eager faces filled him with determination. Ethan moved carefully through the rugged landscape, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. He had hunted these lands for years, learning to read every footprint, every broken branch, every subtle hint of life around him. He followed the tracks of a deer, careful to avoid snapping twigs underfoot. Silence was his ally, and he respected the land enough to move with caution, not force. As he climbed over a small rise, Ethan paused to survey the valley below. The sunlight was beginning to touch the tips of the distant hills, painting them gold. The deer tracks led toward a grove of sparse trees near a small creek. He crouched behind a boulder, breathing slowly and watching. Everything seemed calm, almost too calm. Suddenly, a sound reached his ears, a soft rustle among the rocks that didn't fit the rhythm of the wind. Ethan froze, listening. It wasn't the whisper of animals he knew, not the patter of a rabbit or the scuttle of a lizard. There was something else, something human. He lowered himself further, pressing against the boulder. His mind raced. The land was dangerous, especially now. There had been rumors of raiding parties, tensions between the settlers and the Apache, and not all encounters ended peacefully. He had learned to be cautious. Still, he could not ignore the sound. It was too close. Slowly, he crept forward, keeping low. The rustling grew clearer. Then, through the brush, he saw her, a young woman, crouched near the edge of the creek, her movements hesitant and unsure. She looked small and fragile, her clothing torn and minimal, marked by dust and scratches. Her dark hair was tangled, falling across her face as she looked around nervously. Ethan stopped, his heart beating faster. He had never expected to see anyone alone out here, especially not someone like her. Fear rose within him first. He did not know her intentions. She might be armed, or she might call for others nearby. But then, he saw her eyes wide, uncertain, and almost pleading. She was clearly lost. Perhaps running from something, perhaps hiding. Ethan's fear shifted into caution, mixed with a sense of responsibility. He had faced danger many times before, but this was different. This was not a deer, not a coyote. This was a person, and she seemed helpless. He lowered his rifle slightly, but did not step forward. He tried to speak softly, calling out in English, "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The woman flinched at the sound, her body tensing. Her eyes darted around, unsure if he was friend or foe. She did not understand his words. Ethan realized she spoke only Apache, and he spoke only English. Communication would be difficult, but he hoped gestures would be enough. He extended a hand slowly, then pointed toward the creek, hoping to show she could drink safely. The woman's eyes flicked toward the water, then back to him. She hesitated, then, after a long moment, moved cautiously toward the stream. Ethan kept a careful distance, watching every step. He could not risk frightening her, but he also knew he could not leave her alone. After she drank, she sat on a rock, hugging her knees. He watched her face, noting the dirt, scratches, and tiredness etched into her expression. It was clear she had been traveling for some time, surviving as best she could. His heart ached at the thought. Many had crossed paths with her before, and not all of them had offered help. Ethan was determined he would. Time passed slowly as they sat there, the sun climbing higher. Ethan scanned the surrounding land, wary of potential dangers. He knew he could not stay in one place for long. Predators roamed these lands, and human threats were always possible. Still, he stayed close, careful not to make sudden movements. Gradually, the woman relaxed slightly, though she did not approach him. Her body language suggested fear, but also curiosity. Ethan reached into his pack and pulled out some dried meat and a small piece of bread. He placed it gently on the ground a few feet from her, then stepped back. The woman watched him, her eyes wide with uncertainty. After a long pause, she took the food, eating slowly and cautiously. Ethan watched every movement, relieved that she was eating. Hunger was a dangerous weakness in this land, and she needed strength. As the sun rose higher, Ethan realized he had to make a decision. Leaving her alone could be fatal. The canyon and forest nearby offered shelter, but also predators. She might find her way eventually, but without knowledge of the land, she would be at great risk. Yet bringing her back to the nearest settlement carried its own dangers. People could be suspicious or hostile, and she might not be welcomed. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. He had faced many dangers before, but none like this. He considered the small pack of supplies he carried, the limited ammunition, and the long journey ahead. Still, he knew he could not turn away. The thought of her being left alone in the harsh desert was unbearable. "Come on," he said softly, using his hands to gesture the direction back to the trail. The woman froze at first, unsure, then slowly stood. Her movements were careful, almost tentative. Ethan stepped back, giving her space, but stayed close. They moved together through the scrub and rocks, a fragile rhythm forming between them. The journey was slow. Every sound of movement in the brush made her flinch. Ethan kept his voice calm, his tone gentle, even as he scanned for dangers. He pointed to rocks, to the direction of the trail, and gradually she began to follow without hesitation. He realized she was learning to trust him, even without words. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, the air growing hot, and the desert became more challenging to cross. Ethan offered water from his canteen, watching her drink carefully. He gave her more food when they paused under the shade of a lone mesquite tree. The woman ate quietly, but he could see the relief in her eyes. She was surviving, but she was weary. As they approached the edge of the settlement, Ethan's mind raced. How would the townsfolk react? Would they accept her? Would they understand the story? He did not know. But he also knew he could not abandon her now. She had trusted him to bring her to safety, and he would not fail her. Finally, as the sun began to lower, casting long shadows over the land, Ethan led the woman to the outskirts of the settlement. He kept a careful watch, ready for any trouble. But he also felt a sense of accomplishment. The dangerous part of the day was over, and he had succeeded in keeping her safe so far. He paused, letting her rest, and watched her carefully. She had survived the desert, the hunt for food, and the unknown dangers of the wilderness. She was strong, resilient, and brave, even if her eyes still showed fear. Ethan felt a quiet respect for her, knowing that the desert had tested them both, and both had endured. As the first lights of the settlement appeared in the distance, Ethan realized that his hunt for food had turned into something entirely unexpected. He had gone out with a simple goal to provide for his family but returned having faced a challenge of a different kind, one that would change him forever. The world was unpredictable, harsh, and at times frightening. But it also held moments of courage, compassion, and connection. Today had been one of those moments. Ethan led the young woman forward carefully, knowing that the story of this encounter was only beginning. He did not know what lay ahead, but he knew that for now, he had done the right thing. And in the quiet desert, surrounded by the golden light of the late afternoon, he felt the quiet satisfaction of survival and of doing what was humanly right, no matter how uncertain the path. Ethan moved carefully along the uneven trail, keeping a watchful eye on the young Apache woman walking beside him. She followed his steps, sometimes hesitating when a loose rock or thorny bush blocked the path. Her dark eyes scanned the landscape constantly, alert to every movement, every sound. Ethan knew the desert was unforgiving, and he had to make sure she stayed safe. The sun was now high in the sky, beating down on the dry ground, and the heat made the journey even more challenging. Ethan took small sips from his canteen and offered her some water. At first, she only took a few drops, unsure if it was safe, but gradually, she drank more freely, her body relaxing slightly with each sip. He realized that the smallest gestures of care could build trust, even without words. They walked in silence for a while, only the crunch of boots on rocks and the whisper of the wind through the scrub breaking the stillness. Ethan knew that moving quietly was safer. Sudden sounds could attract predators or unwanted attention. Yet, the silence was also peaceful, allowing him to observe her closely. She was small, but her posture showed resilience. Despite her vulnerability, she had survived alone in the harsh wilderness, and that earned his quiet admiration. As the afternoon wore on, Ethan spotted signs of wildlife along the trail rabbit tracks, the faint shadow of a coyote slipping between the rocks. He knew he had to keep alert, but he also thought about food. He had planned to hunt for his family earlier, but now the focus was on keeping both of them alive. He carried the weight of responsibility carefully, knowing that every step could make a difference. He found a shaded spot under a cluster of mesquite trees near a shallow stream. He gestured for her to sit, and she lowered herself carefully onto the ground, hugging her knees. Ethan laid out some dried meat and bread from his pack. At first, she hesitated, unsure if it was safe to eat. Ethan smiled gently and pointed to the food, then to himself, indicating that he meant no harm. Slowly, she reached for a piece, her hands shaking slightly. She took small bites, eyes never leaving him, as if making sure he was real and trustworthy. While she ate, Ethan scanned the horizon, noticing the mountains in the distance where the settlement lay. They were still far, but the land was gentler ahead, with fewer cliffs and more open space. He knew that once they reached the settlement, the challenges would not end. People might not understand the situation, and the young woman might be met with suspicion or fear. But he also knew that this was the safest place for her. They rested for a short while, allowing her to regain strength. Ethan talked softly, using simple words and gestures to explain their direction. She watched him carefully, following his movements and trying to imitate gestures. Communication was slow, but small signs of understanding passed between them. She nodded at his pointing to the distant hills, and he smiled faintly, appreciating the silent exchange. When they resumed walking, the terrain became more forgiving. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the land. Ethan noticed her steps growing steadier, her confidence increasing as she moved. He was careful not to rush her, knowing that exhaustion could make her vulnerable. His rifle remained slung over his shoulder, ready, but he did not carry it in a threatening way. The land could be unpredictable, and caution was his constant companion. They encountered a narrow canyon with a small stream running through it. Ethan motioned for her to follow him carefully along the bank. The water was shallow but fast-moving, and he helped her across by offering a steady hand. She hesitated, looking uncertain, but eventually took his hand and stepped carefully from stone to stone. The simple act of helping her across the stream seemed to deepen her trust in him, even though she said nothing. As they moved through the canyon, Ethan kept thinking about the stories he had heard of settlers and Native Americans. He knew that fear and misunderstanding often led to conflict, but he hoped that careful actions and respect could prevent harm. He wanted her to feel safe, and he knew that safety depended on both of them trusting each other. By evening, the first lights of the settlement began to glimmer in the distance. Ethan felt a sense of relief, mixed with caution. The journey was almost over, but he still had to navigate the reactions of the townspeople. He gestured for the young woman to stay close, keeping her in the shadows until they were near enough to move confidently. Her steps were now sure, and he noticed a small flicker of curiosity in her eyes as she glimpsed the lights of homes and fences. As they approached the outskirts of the settlement, Ethan saw a few townspeople working near the fences. They paused, watching him and the young woman carefully. Ethan raised his hand in greeting, showing that he meant no harm. The woman stayed slightly behind him, her posture cautious but calm. Ethan spoke softly to the people, explaining in simple words that he had found her alone and was bringing her to safety. The townspeople looked surprised, but Ethan's calm manner and careful explanation eased their suspicion. They led the young woman to a small building where she could rest and recover. Ethan watched as she explored the simple shelter, her eyes wide with curiosity at the unfamiliar surroundings. She handled the objects carefully, touching them as if testing their safety. Ethan smiled quietly, admiring her intelligence and adaptability. Despite all she had been through, she remained alert, aware, and thoughtful. Ethan stayed with her for a while, making sure she had enough food and water. He gestured to her to sit and rest, and she obeyed, sitting quietly on a bench near the window. The light of the setting sun painted warm colors across the room, and Ethan realized how far they had come together. From the lonely desert to the safety of the settlement, the journey had been long, challenging, and full of unexpected moments of trust and understanding. As night fell, Ethan reflected on the day. He had gone out hunting for food, expecting a routine trip into the wilderness. But instead, he had found himself guiding and protecting someone he did not know. The experience had tested his patience, his judgment, and his courage in ways he had not anticipated. Yet, it had also shown him the power of compassion and the importance of helping those in need. The young woman rested quietly, her eyes closing for the first time in many days. Ethan felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that he had done what was right. He had not only protected her but also provided her with a chance to recover, to regain strength, and to find safety. The desert could be cruel, but today had reminded him that human kindness could shine even in the harshest conditions. The next morning, Ethan returned briefly to the settlement to gather more supplies and check on the young woman. She had slept through the night peacefully, and when she saw him, she smiled faintly. Though they could not speak the same language, there was a mutual understanding between them, a quiet acknowledgement of trust, respect, and shared survival. Ethan explained, through gestures and simple words, that she would be safe here, and that help would be available for her. She listened attentively, nodding at his explanations, her dark eyes reflecting both relief and curiosity. He realized that the journey was only the beginning of a longer story, one that would require patience, care, and continued understanding. In the days that followed, Ethan occasionally checked on her, bringing small gifts of food and supplies. He watched as she began to explore the settlement cautiously, learning its rhythms and understanding its people. Her resilience impressed him every day, and he admired the quiet courage she displayed despite all she had endured. Through this experience, Ethan understood that survival was not only about hunting, tracking, and physical endurance. It was also about trust, compassion, and connection. The desert had tested him in ways he had not expected, and the young woman had taught him that strength came in many forms. Together, they had faced uncertainty, danger, and fear, and through it all, they had built a bond that transcended language and culture. The young woman's presence changed the settlement as well. People who had initially been cautious began to see her as a person, not a stranger. Her quiet resilience and the story of her journey inspired respect. Ethan watched as interactions grew calmer and more understanding, and he realized that one act of compassion could ripple outward. affecting many lives. As the sun set over the settlement, casting long shadows across the fences and streets, Ethan felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The hunt he had begun with the simple goal of providing food had turned into an extraordinary lesson in humanity, courage, and empathy. The young woman, once alone and vulnerable, now had safety, care, and a place to recover. And Ethan, who had faced countless challenges in the wilderness, had discovered the profound impact of small acts of kindness. The story of that day, when a routine hunt became an unexpected journey of trust and survival, remained with Ethan forever. The desert was still wild, unpredictable, and sometimes harsh, but it had also shown him that even in the most difficult circumstances, human connection could prevail. And in the quiet moments of reflection, he understood that the true measure of courage was not only in facing danger, but in choosing to help another, even when the path was uncertain.